Hi, I'm Grant from BlackMagic Design, and today we're going to show you how to plug in and get running with your Atem production switches. Now I've got a whole range of equipment here. I've got a 2ME production switcher, I've got a 1ME panel, and I've also got a BlackMagic Studio camera here which has camera control in it, so we can show you how that works as well. Really, in many ways the first step to getting your switcher working is to plug in the power. So I've already done that, but the big, really what you want to see is it running? So on this model I've got a screen and aux controls on the front panel, so I can quickly check and push the color bar button and tell that I've got the switcher seems to be running. So if you look at the front panel, you've got an aux control on the front panel of this model. You see this model's also got 6 aux outs, so I can route the various sources, that the external sources and internal sources of the camera, of the switcher into those aux outputs, and you do it on the front panel, but it's quite a good way of seeing if the switch is working. But really, for every model of Atem switcher, the best way to see if it's working, I reckon, is to plug in the multi-view. Now, these multi-views let you use a cheap TV to do all your video monitoring. I've got a fairly cheap TV here, and I'm going to plug in the HDMI cable. It's a HDMI TV, so I'll plug in, I'll get a standard sort of HDMI cable, and I'll plug it in the back of the television and then plug that into the multi-view output. This model of switch has got 2 multi-views on it because it's got so many sources. It's got 20 inputs and tons of internal things like super source and keys and things. So there's 2 multi-views built in. The multi-view in this case is on the rear panel here, and I'll plug that in. And then I should see a picture come up on the television. And I can see I've got my I've got color bars coming in and color bars going to air there. So I can now see, you can see I've got a whole range of sources and my program and preview views up on there. Now there's an SDI, you can have SDI or HDMI connected to the multi-views because you've got both HDMI and SDI outputs. In this case I'm just using a television, so I'll use the HDMI output. And using televisions is a very portable and a very easy way to do a monitoring with a lot of sources. I mean, I've got 8 inputs there I can look at. I've also got my program and preview views. So it's quite a fantastic solution when you're doing real portable, mobile production, when you're moving around a lot just to use a television. So I've got that come up, so I know the switch is running, and that's a good step. I think once you plug the multi-view and you see it, you know the whole switch is functioning, everything's working well, and you can start to see what's going on because of course you can see sources there. So now I think the next step is to plug in the hardware panel. Now I've got a hardware panel. You might not have a hardware panel, you might be controlling your switcher from a Mac or a PC, but in this case I've got a hardware panel, so I'll plug that in first because it's kind of a really easy step to do. Now you'll need an Ethernet cable to do that. I've got an Ethernet cable here, and there's 2 sockets on the back of the panel, so I'll just plug into one of those, and then I'll plug into the back of the switcher. There's an Ethernet socket on the back of the switcher, and I'll just plug into that. And you should even see some activity indicator, little lights flickering on the back to tell that there's communications going on. Now as you can see, I've got the control panels come up, and that's great. So now I've got some activity going on, and the switcher, I've got some control going on, so that's also a good sign. When you buy these, the switcher and the panels, they come set up to allow you to just plug them in like that. So if you've got a hardware panel, I reckon you should probably plug that in first because it's a very easy way to check that the switch is running. But of course, you want to do a whole lot more. You want to do camera control and audio mixing, and and of course, if you're not running a hardware panel, you want to get the computer to work. So the next step is to plug the computer in. Now I'm going to loop my computer through the hardware panel because I've got 2 connectors on there, so it acts as a bit of a hub. So I'll get another cable, which I've got here, and I'll plug into my panel. So there's 2 sockets on the back of the panel, and you can plug into any one of them. They're both interchangeable. And on the other end of this connection, I'll plug into my computer. And there's my little Ethernet connector. There it is. Now, because it's a computer, you do have to tell the computer where the switcher is. You've got to set the computer up so it knows what its IP address is. Now, the great thing about having Ethernet as the control panel connection for the switches is you could control the switcher from the other side of the planet. It's very, very flexible. But that does mean, though, when you get the computer going, you just have to set that one number. So what we'll do is we'll go into the settings, which we have here. And this is a Mac, but Windows is quite similar. I'll click on the network setting, and you can see here I've got it as a default setting. I'll set it manually. Now, the switcher comes set to an IP address of 192.168.10.240, and it's important that the first 3 digits are the same, but the last digits are different. So the panel comes to set to 192.168.10.10, And that's the way they come. So that last digit's different, which means they don't clash, but the first 3 digits are the same, so they can talk to each other. Now what I want to do is set the computer to a different number again. So I'm going to set the computer to 192.168.10.50. So I'll type that in here, 192.168.10.50. And I'll also, it's important to set these numbers to 255, 255, 255, and 0. Sometimes that can be a problem, sometimes it's not, but I think it's a good idea to set it and click apply. And there you go. And now my little buttons come green, so it means the computer seems to be happy it's talking to the panel and the switcher. So I'll quit that, and there I am. Now you're going to want to download off our website the latest software for the switcher. The switcher comes with software, the Atem software control. But when the products were built, they might be a little later than the latest model of version of software on our website. So it's definitely worth going to our website and downloading the latest software. So you've got the absolute latest version of software. Now, in this case, I've done that and I've installed it. I've in the applications folder, there's a folder that says BlackMagic Atem switches. I'm going to open that up, and you can see a whole bunch of things in here. This is the Atem control software here. There's the instruction manual, and this utility here lets you set some of the network settings up in the switcher, and also gives you the software download. If you've downloaded the latest software, we might have added new firmware in the switches. So this software will let you download into the switcher and the panel the latest software. But what we'll do is, I'll show you that in a minute, but the first thing we'll do is we'll see if the software control panel works. So let's run that. So there it is, and that's working. So that's good. That means that the computer's set to the right network setting, and the software's seen the switcher and it's talking, and you can see all the buttons and lights have come up. And you can see I can select things here and it all looks like it's working fine. So that's working, so that's good. Now, of course, what happens if things go wrong? What happens if your control panel doesn't come up? Well, if your control panel doesn't come up, you'll probably see a network button there showing you that you can change the settings. You can be putting these devices on the internet, or you can have them connected to your internal network, or you might just have them direct plugged in like I've got. If you've got them plugged directly in, then I would use the standard network settings that I've just talked about, and all that information's in the manual if you need to look that up. But if you want to change the control panel settings, in this case it's working, so the network setting doesn't appear. But if you want to see it, if you push these 2 buttons down, you'll see it appear down the bottom there, and you can push it, and you can see all the network settings in there. Now that'll appear if the panel isn't working. Like if the panel's not talking to a switcher, that setting will be there. So if you need to change the control panel settings, you'll see that network setting button will be there. But otherwise, I won't do that. I'll just go back to the normal settings. The network and settings button isn't there normally until you push these 2 buttons down, the shift and the cut fill button, because you don't want that getting in the way when you're doing a live production and you accidentally hit that button. So it's kind of hidden unless you need to change it. Okay, so the next step is, if things don't work, you might need to update the firmware. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll quit the app, the control interface, and I'll run this Atem setup utility. Now the reason you might need to do this, it's not something you need to do that often, but you might find if you've downloaded the latest software from our website and you run it, it might come up saying that it can't talk to the switcher because you've got to do a software update. Or you might find that someone else has been running the switcher and they've changed the settings in the switcher. So you might either need to update the firmware or you need to set the settings back. And the way you do that is you plug a USB cable in once you've run this utility software, and you plug in a simple, it's very much the same type of cable as you use with a printer. And you plug that into your computer, and then the utility will see your switcher and then tell you what the settings are, and also it'll check the firmware automatically. So I'll plug my USB cable into the side of my computer, and I'll plug the other end of it into the connector. Now this connector for the USB is underneath the network connector here, so I'll just plug that in. I'll plug it over here. There it is there. Good, and you can see it's appeared, the interface for the software has appeared. And the good thing is it's just come up with the settings, and you can see it there, it's set to 192.168.10.240, which that's the same number it has when you get the switcher direct from the factory as a new switcher. Now the great thing that's really good here is that it's come up with the settings, but it hasn't come up telling me that I need to update the software. So that means that the software that I'm running on my computer that I downloaded off the internet is exactly the same software that's in the switcher itself, so there's no update required. But if you did come up saying you need to update the software, then this utility would come up and you just click OK and it would download the new software. And you'll tell that if you run the Atem control panel software, it'll also check the switcher and tell you if the switcher's at a date and you need to update the software. So if you don't get any messages doing that, then it looks like everything's working great. This utility is also the utility you plug the USB into the control panel and you can update that as well, all from this utility here. But everything looks good, the settings are fine, everything's communicating, so I don't need to do anything. So I'll quit this and I'll unplug my USB cable because I don't need it, and I'll put that aside. There you go. So what we'll do is we'll go back into the Atem software and we can now start changing some of the settings in our switcher and setting up the switcher the way we want it to be for doing our live production. Well, really the first step before I can plug sources in, the very first step, and it's very important, is to set the switcher video standard. This is the 4K switcher, so it runs at 4K resolutions and 1080 HD and 720p HD and SD resolution. So you can set that, and this is in the switcher settings. You can see the little cog icon down here. When you click that, you'll see all the different video formats in the video standard here. Now, if I click on that, you can see there's quite a lot of different formats. It's currently set to an Ultra HD format, but I'll set it to 1080i 5904, which is a pretty common HD format if you're using the switcher in, say, the US or Japan. If you're running the switcher in Europe, you might do 25 frames. Now that looks pretty good, so I'll click on that, and then, whoops, actually, one thing I didn't do, which is a great thing that you should check, when you do set that, I didn't set it, because obviously it's a pretty major setting to change, so I'll go back to it. I didn't push this little button, so you push set. It'll tell you that it's going to clear the media pool. When you change switcher resolutions, it'll clear the media pool, so it's telling you that. Double checking to make sure you really do want to change the video standard. Click OK, and you saw the multi-view has come back. Now my 4K switcher is actually just running in HD. So that's great, that's what I want to do. I've got all that set up. So great. Now what I want to do is I want to check the input labels. The next step for the, when you start plugging sources into the switcher, they don't come up as connector numbers on the rear panel. This model of switcher's got 20 inputs. It's a lot of inputs. Now you don't really want to see those as 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to see them as what they are. So you can set the inputs to have labels on them. And then wherever you see a source in the switcher, you'll see it as a label. So what I'll do is I'll go back into the switcher settings, and I'll click on input labels, and you can see I've got the capability of doing that here. Funny enough, input 1 of this switch has got both SDI and HDMI input, and you can switch it. I'll leave it on SDI because I'm going to use it as an SDI source. And what I'll do is I can change the labels in here. I could make it camera 20 and click OK, but I won't do that. I'll just set it back to camera 1. I like using camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. I find that easier, especially when you're talking to the camera people through TalkBack. It's easier just to say, hey, camera 1, camera 2. So, but you could change that to wide shot or mid shot or close up. It's really up to you how you want to label those sources. But once you've labeled them, they'll reflect through on all the control panels, the software control panels, the hardware panel. Because remember, because the keyboard connection is Ethernet, I can have multiple copies of software running. I could have someone running just the audio mixer or just the camera control on separate computers running separate copies of the software, all talking to the one switcher. So all those control panels, all the hardware panels will all reflect what the input labels are. So I'm happy with that, so I'll hit save. And so that's good. I've got my switcher standard set. I've got my input labeled camera 1. I've got camera 1 here, so let's plug in camera 1. So the first step is to get a video cable, which we'll use a standard BNC video cable, and we'll plug out of the camera into the switcher. Now this is a BlackMagic studio camera HD model, and it's got on the side some video connections. It's got Genlock and it's got SDI in and out. Now you might wonder why SDI in is on the camera. The reason we've got that is there's a program button on the back of the viewfinder here, you can see. So I can select to look at the output of the switcher, and that can be a really useful feature. But it also allows us to do camera control and tally, which I'll get to in a minute. But for the moment, what we'll do to plug the camera in, we'll just plug in our SDI video output over here, which is the top connector on here. Now I can plug in optical fiber as well. There's optical fiber built into the camera, but really this is just a simple setup. So I'll just run video cables. And when you're running, tens of meters, video cables are a great way to plug things in, very low cost. So what I'll do is I'll come over to the back of the switcher and I'll plug the other end of the cable into input 1. So there I am. And I can see over here, when I turn the camera around, you can see I've got quite a nice picture coming up, and that's coming up on the source on the multi-view. And I've also got it selected on the preview because it's selected down here. So that's great. I've got a source working. There's no Genlock plugged in, but every input of the switcher's got a resynchronizer. So that's great. It means I can plug sources in and I don't actually have to use Genlock. So that means it's just working, and that looks good. And it says camera 1 on the label because that label is reflected from the input, because I labeled input number 1, camera 1. So now it's worth really having a quick look at the front of the control panel. I'll use the front of the hardware panel here, but you can see that the software panel has got a very similar look to the hardware panel, very similar arrangement of settings. So the control panel's, it's laid out in a very sort of almost the way the processing goes through the switcher is the way that the panel's laid out. So the very first area is really the input selections you've got around here. This is where you select what cameras you want to put on air, what cameras you want to feed into the rest of the transition block. You've got this select bus along the top here. This is where you can, it's almost like a router control panel in some ways. This is where you can select different sources to go into keys or into DVEs. This switch has got a DVE plus sort of 4 simpler DVEs in the super source, so you can do picture-in-picture type effects. You can do a lot of those routing on this bus here. Down here is where you do your transition control. It's this big T-bar thing that you see on most switches where you can push it backwards and forwards. You can also do other things. And then up here you've got the keyer controls. There's 4 chroma keyer, keyers built into the switcher. You can control them from here. And down here you've got downstream keyers, and downstream keyers are great because that's where you put logos and bugs and other, little things over the top of the, if you're doing a really complex mix with a lot of stuff going on, you might have that little live logo or the station ID, and that's where you tend to put them in the downstream keyer. And at the very end you'll find there's this FTB button, and that's a fade to black button. When you push that, it fades whatever you're doing down to black, and it's really what you use at maybe the start or the end of a program, or if you go to a commercial break, that just fades everything down, so you don't have to worry about a logo staying up or something like that. Now I can run through this quickly, but I think to me, when I first saw a production switcher, and I mean, I've been in the industry a while, and in the old days, post-production used to use live production switches for doing video editing. Now we use non-linear editing software, but in the old days, people actually used live production switches. And I remember when I first got into post-production, I used an AB direct type switcher. So this is a program preview type switcher, and I found that a very different way of working. What really struck me as strange when I first looked at it was when I flipped the T-bar up, everything kind of flops over, and I wondered why that really was like that. Now the high-end guys know what that is, and if you've been experienced with switches, you'll know what that is, and in some ways you'll find my explanation kind of boring. But what I find, and what I really love about the program preview style of operation is I can set any source along the bottom here and look at things without really worrying about what's on air. What's on air is on this row of buttons here. So at the moment I'll put color bars on air. So there's my program output. This output on the multi-view is what will be coming out of the video output of my switcher, and that's currently set to color bars. I could fade that to black, as I can use the FTP button. Color bars isn't that exciting, but you can see the point is whatever's on this row here is coming out, the program out. So I can immediately tell what's on air just by looking at it. And it's very powerful because it means I can punch along here and see what camera I like to look at before I put it on air. So it means I can make a decision of what I want to do before I do it. And I've even got a preview transition button here that I can turn on, and check in the manual for more descriptions of how this works, which it'll even let me preview a transition to see how the transition is going to look before I do it. But in this case, the solution, you select on the preview row what you want to see, and I'm going to put camera 1 on air, and then all you really do is push the cut button. And now you'll see that the camera 1, it kind of copies the preview up to the program row, and in fact it also copies what was on air down to the preview row, so then you can make a next selection. In this case I might want to pick one of the color generators. Then I push cut and it goes on air. So you select all your sources down on the preview row here, and then you push one of these action buttons over here to bring it to air. I can do a transition, so I can do a crossfade. So if I want to know what's about to happen, I just have to look down here and go, well, if I push the auto button to do a fade, it's going to do it to camera 1 because that's what's on my preview row, and I can see it even in the preview view over there. So if I push that, there it goes. Now I can tell that I've got the old color generator set, but I can go to color bars. There they are there. I can push it again, and then I go to color bars. So I think the program preview way of working is really very powerful because it in some ways protects you from making errors because you can see what you're doing before you do it. Now these control panels can be selected between the program preview mode or the AB direct. And the AB direct mode, which you will have seen, I used to use switches that were AB direct, and they're very popular by people who love them. Very simple to use. With an AB direct switcher, the T-bars at the bottom, so that's the row that's on air. The T-bars at the top, so that's the row that's on air. And when you're using it like that, you won't see the flipping effect happening here because you're really just moving up and down between the bottom row and the top row, and depending on where the T handle is really basically what's on air. But I really have fallen in love with this program preview way of controlling the switcher because I think it's very powerful. Okay, well the next step, I'd love to show you the keys, but if we download a graphic, then we can use that to sort of see how the keys work, and that's another good step to kind of learn how to use. So if I click the media pool button here, you can see I've got a whole lot of images here. Now this is the media pool in the switcher. You can see I've got 32 still frames here, and I've got a couple of clips. And the clips also have audio. So if you're using like stinger effects, and you can have a stinger come through with audio and and a motion graphic. It's very, very powerful features. But I'm just going to load a graphic. Now in the Atem folder here, you'll see there's some example graphics. These are all Ultra HD graphics, which have their Photoshop format. So you can change them, and you can use them in your own production if you like. You can change the titles and save them out as a TIFF or a Targa file. Now I've done that. I've got one other thing that's actually quite nice too while I'm here. You can see I've also got some photos. So I can download a photo into the switcher, and you can see it loading there. And these are kind of useful to have as, they're just some BlackMagic photos, but they're quite useful to use as sort of test signals, and when you're playing around with the switcher. My feeling is that if we can include a few of these graphics, when you're learning how to use a switcher and you just want to potter with it for a while, it's nice to have some of these things so you can use them. But what I'll do is I've created a graphic. I loaded one of the graphics that we have, the examples, in Photoshop format. I've saved it on the desktop as a TIFF file, and I'll drag that into the media pool as well, and you can see there it is. Now I'm running the switcher in HD, in 1080 HD, but all these graphics are all in Ultra HD. So if you're running the switcher in Ultra HD, they'll load in and they'll be fine. If you're running in HD, the software here will recognize that and go, you're running HD, I've got an Ultra HD resolution graphic, it'll down resolution it before it loads into the switcher for you. So you can kind of do all your media in Ultra HD if you like, and then as you're downloading them, depending whether you're switching between HD or Ultra HD, the switcher will take care of down resolution images for you. So it makes it a lot easier. You can leave all your media and all the content you create in Ultra HD, and let you move to Ultra HD on a job immediately and keep using your media. So I've downloaded two graphics here. I've got a photo in still position 1, and I've got a lower third graphic in still position 2. Now it also turns out that I've got these media play buttons here. These are the media plays. There's a media pool in the switches, which is where you store all your content, but then there's two media players, and what those media players do is you point them to one of the positions in the media pool, and it takes that graphic and makes it available as a video source into the rest of the switcher. Now if I wanted to put that lower third graphic, there's a couple of steps I really want to do. The first step is to load my graphics in the media pool, which is what I've done. The second step is to point one of the media players to it, and the media players can be changed to point to any position in the media pool, but I've got media player 2 here with the 2 tag set to that. Now I've done that. The great thing is the next step is that means that media player 2 has got that graphic coming out, and it's got an alpha channel and a pos, so it should key very easily. So what I'll do is I'll go back into the switcher control, and I'll load this into the downstream keyer. So I'll click the downstream keyer tab, and you can see I've got a source. Now my key is just taking black at the moment, but I'll select that to be media player 2, which is what I had that lower third graphic into. And it's already selected the key for me. You can select a different key source if you like. It'll automatically select the key of the media player when you do that. Now if I want to bring that on air, all I do is push the on air button, and you can see on the multi-view, the program output now has that graphic on it, and it's automatically keyed itself because it's got an alpha channel. So that couldn't be really much easier than that. I've also got this auto button here, so I can fade graphics on and off, and there's a separate transition setting here. You can click on that transition setting and change it. There's another cool little trick that all the keyers do in Atem switches, and it's a fairly common thing for switches, is you can tie that in. So for example, I might turn that off, but I'll tie it. And what that'll do is when you activate the main transition block here, it'll pull that keyer on and off with it. So I've got, on my preview row, camera 1 selected. I've got color bars set on air at the moment. So what I want to do is I want to transition the graphic and the camera on together. And I've got the graphic being keyed in my downstream keyer. I've got the camera source selected here on the preview row. So when I click the auto button, you'll see that both the downstream keyer and the camera have come on air, and they've come on air together. So you can do a whole lot of different types of ways of tying keys into different transitions, and it's quite a powerful thing to do. Again, I can change the type of transition I'm doing here. So I can do a dip or a wipe. So there's, now I've got all my my camera in, I've got a graphic in there. There's quite a lot of things I can do. I can change different types of transitions. Pushing the auto button will give me the transition, whereas I can just push cut when I just want to cut between sources. I can untie, here's the tie button on the control panel, I can untie that, so when I now do my transition, it's just going to stay on there. If I had a station ID, I could put that on there. So, and of course, at the very end, it doesn't matter what's going on. If I push my fade to black, the whole thing fades down. So again, check the manual for a lot more detail on how a lot of these settings work. There's a lot in there. color generators and keys and all sorts of things. So the next step is, and of course, well, what we'll do next, I think the next step is some camera control. Now this is all looking a little bit small, so what I'll do, this is the newer Atem software that's on our website now. I can drag my window over here. I want to get it really nice and big because this is the 2ME switcher and I'm only seeing 1ME here. I can switch between the MEs, but what I really want to do is see both MEs at once. So I'm going to drag that window out now, and as you see, as I drag the window out, you'll see the extra buttons pop up and the ME pop up. So now I've got the whole switcher and both ME rows here visible. There's more space for the palettes. But what this will let me do is when I move to the camera control window, I've got a much more space for my camera control. So it's really a nice thing to do before I use the full space of the screen. Now, as you can see, this camera control, this is very much like a CCU style of look. Anyone who's used to switches will know that this is how you can control cameras with a CCU. This is like a software version of it. Now you might be wondering, how does this information from here get into the camera? Because I'm not connected to the camera. Well, that's where I need to connect my camera up now, because all the video outputs of the switcher, except the down-converted output, all the outputs of the switcher have camera control and tally information being broadcast out all the connections. So if I plug an extra BNC cable in, which I've got another one here, not only can I get the program output of the switcher into the camera and I can push the program button here and see it, so the camera operators can see what the switcher is doing, but I can also send the tally information from the switcher and the camera control information to the camera. And there's a full DaVinci primary color corrector in this camera. We really wanted to give people a lot more creative power than just a simple color adjustment. Like most people just need to match cameras, but we really wanted to sort of go to a whole new creative level. Plus, we've got all these DaVinci Resolve customers out there who know how to do color correction, and that's a complete creative art form in itself, color correction. I mean, I always joke that I used to be an old telecine engineer, and to me, the power of color correction is really about putting the emotion track into the images. So I think it's a very important thing to do, and by having it in the camera, we've got the capability of doing a whole lot more than just color matching. We can do creative, grading in the cameras and have a much more creative look. So to get this information, to get this control into the camera, I need to plug an extra cable in. So I'll go to the side of the camera and where my video input is, that's my connection there. And I'll go and plug the other end of that cable. Now I'm going to use aux output number 1. So I'll plug that into the back here. Now, of course, I've got aux control in the front of the camera. I'll flip this around. One thing you'll notice is the camera's got darker. What's happened is the camera's recognized that it needs to be controlled by the switcher, and the switcher settings have overridden the camera color correction settings and the iris setting. So now the next step is to do some adjustments, but I'll set a few things up first. Now, if I push the program button on the camera, I'm going to get color bars because that's what I've got coming out of the aux output, and you can see that on the front panel of the switcher. On the front panel of the switcher, I've just got bars selected. So what I'll do is I'll select the program output of the on aux output 1. So now aux output 1 on the switcher, and in fact I can do that on the control software here as well. You can see aux output 1 up here in the menu. I just selected it to program. Of course, the front panel and the software here match. Whatever you set on the front panel gets reflected in the software here. So you can set the aux output control from here or from any of the software control panels or even the hardware panel. So now I've got program coming from my switcher to the camera, and that makes it much nicer for the camera operator because you can push that program feed and you can see even the super and everything's there. So that's quite a powerful feature. Very useful for the camera operators just to be able to see what's going on, particularly in I used to do horse racing when I was younger, and sometimes you'd be waiting for minutes and minutes, for your camera to go on air. So it's kind of nice just to watch what the switcher's doing. I've always thought this is a very powerful feature. But the other thing that you get, of course, is I've got the tally information coming to the camera, and I've also got the camera control stuff. And you can see that's working because the tally light's come on. Sorry, the tally light hasn't come on. It's on now because I've just put camera 1 on the program row. Now it's come on. So to make that work, of course, I'm sending out all the camera information and all the tally information for all the cameras out the video outputs. So you've got to tell the camera what connection, like what camera number it is. Now I've plugged this camera into camera input 1. I'm going to use it as camera 1, so it's already set to camera 1, but I can go to the menu on here, and I can go along and set camera 1 on the top of the menu there, and you can change that. Now that's already set, so I don't have to do anything. This was already set to input 1, so I'll just push the menu off and get rid of that. So I'm all set to go. I can see that I'm on air. I can turn the camera on and off air, and I can see that it's tally lights going on and off, so that all looks like it's working really well. The camera's got a lot darker, so you can tell that this camera control's now talking to the camera, and I've really got to do my adjustments from the user interface. Now what's interesting, you can see the camera's tally going on and off, but if you look at the software interface down here, you can see that I've also got this big red patch on here. Now that's the most exciting over-the-top, thing we could make to tell you, don't adjust that camera, because if you adjust that camera, you're going to adjust the camera that's on air. And you don't really normally want to do that, so we've put a very big indicator on there. You can also see the camera labels, of course, on there as well. So now we can do some adjustments. But there is a first step. A lot of the times when you're setting up for a job, you can come to the control panel, you can sort of switch between your control panels to tell what, to kind of get your cameras matched, because you really want to be switching between the cameras to get them all matched. But you can't always do that when you're on air. I mean, when you're on air, you might be doing a sporting event, you're starting to lose a light, you want to open up the irises a bit, maybe put in a bit of gain, and if how do you compare the cameras when you're doing that? So one of the things that's definitely worth setting up is getting one of the aux outputs and setting a video monitor to it, and also maybe even a smart scope with waveform monitoring. That can be very nice to use scopes when you're color grading. And when you click between the different the channels to control, the aux output will switch. So what I'll do is I'll go into the settings, and I'll go into general, and down here by default it's set to none, because you don't really want the camera control interface banging away at your aux outputs if you're using aux outputs for something else. In this case, I'm using aux1 to feed to the camera to give the camera program view, which I've selected. So I'll use aux output 2 there. Now I've set that, what you'll see is when I switch between the channels, the aux2 output will switch between those camera sources. And I don't have a monitor connector, but a really easy way to see that is if I just go and select aux2 on the front panel, as I switch between the channels, you'll see the buttons change. And what it's doing automatically for me is switching between the aux outputs. Now it'll also happen when I can switch between the channels here. Now you can still go to aux2 and just set it to anything, which of course I can do. But the minute you push one of those channel buttons, the control interfaces where you'd start to control anything, it'll immediately switch that aux2. So what that means is you can switch over here between outputs, and that'll be feeding those different cameras to the aux out, which means you can use separate video monitoring to compare the cameras while you're on air. And as long as you don't adjust the camera that's got the red indication on it, you're not adjusting a camera that's on air. So you'll try to adjust the cameras that are not on air, and then when the camera that's currently on air goes off air, you can go and target that and then get that matched as well. So looks like we're all set up. Everything's looking pretty good to do camera control. So let's have a quick look at how that works. Now I've got a very CCU style interface here. This is a very common thing if you're a switcher expert. You kind of know, this should look pretty familiar to you. You've got the standard sort of iris control here. Now I've got an active lens on this camera, so it's been controlled. And what you're seeing here is the control that I'm doing here being fed through the network cable into the switcher. The switcher is now sending that information out to all the cameras. This camera is set to camera number 1. I'm adjusting the settings on camera number 1, so it's picked it up, and that control information is being given to the camera, then sent to the lens. So I've got control of the lens iris. I've also got set, I can see I've just, this is focus down here. I've just adjusted the focus, and it's gone out of focus, but I can also push the autofocus button. It'll trigger the autofocus on the camera. So I think I'm probably a little bit hot there. I might just bring it back a little bit. That looks pretty nice. And any left or right movement is the black gain in the camera. So you can sort of adjust it around. I've got some gain settings here. I can put in some extra gain, but that's obviously not really needed here. I can also change the shutter speed, and I've got some color control here. So I could go in here and I can do some gamma correction, which, this is a full DaVinci primary color corrector, so it's not just a simple color bouncing. You've got some quite nice control. I can also, I'll put in a bunch of color, you can see there. Now I can reset those. There's a reset button here to reset all that. It'll bring it back to normal. So you can see it's quite a simple, nice way of working. You can switch between the cameras just by coming over here the minute you switch any of these. And funny, you can even see the screen down there. You can see as I've selected camera 1, that aux output's visible because I've selected aux output on there, and you can see that's what would be on the monitor if you're adjusting. So it's very, very easy to use. Now, if you're a switcher expert, this is a very familiar way to work, but if you're a DaVinci Resolve colorist and you've been doing post-production colorist, or you've downloaded DaVinci Resolve from our website, because we have DaVinci Resolve Lite, which is a free version, you can download that and practice color correction and get to know the sort of art of color correction. But if color correction is an art form that you kind of, that you are into and you've got experience in, then you probably want to push this button here which gives you a full DaVinci sort of primary color correction palette. And this is pretty much almost exactly identical from DaVinci Resolve. And you've got the color wheels side by side. And in this case, you really want to use these buttons up here because you want to switch between the camera channels and leave this interface up. But you've got, a lot of control here. You've got, all kinds of, camera adjustments. And remember, DaVinci Resolve is a YRGB color corrector. What that means is you can adjust the Y channel independently of the red, green, and blue channel. And there's a trick to doing that. If you look down here, you can see the YRGB values. If you want to adjust the Y value independently, you can adjust them all together, which is I'm doing there. You can see the numbers changing together. But if I hold down the Option or Alt key, you can then adjust just the Y channel by itself. And that can create some really interesting looks because you can kind of sort of bring the white out and sort of create this sort of almost glowing angelic look, or it kind of pops out. It's very creative. There's some nice, real creative capability in there. And again, it's a full DaVinci primary color corrector, so you can kind of, it works the same way that DaVinci Resolve does when you're just using the primary color correction palette. So if you're experienced with that, this creatively works exactly the same way. You've even got some of the other settings down here. You can see there's the usual saturation settings, so I can adjust that and make it really colorful, or I can bring it back to black and white. I've got contrast settings, so I can start creating some really kind of interesting looks. There's even hue. And then there's this Loom Mix button down here, slider. Now the Loom Mix, if you're a DaVinci Resolve expert, you'll know that the YRGB color corrector, there's also an RGB color corrector, and they kind of operate together. What this lets you do is blend between the YRGB color corrector and the RGB color corrector. So over on the right hand side here, it's all YRGB, and you can sort of blend across to RGB. And you'll get a sort of, depending on what kind of color grade you've got and what kind of Y grading you're doing, you'll get a bit of a variation in look. But again, this is all about how do you want your pictures to look. It's not so much about how you want the pictures to be accurate. There is that, but often, people get too technically accurate, when often it's an emotional thing. This is about how you feel you want your pictures to look, not how they should look. And it's, this gives you, if you're doing, say, music videos, you might want to get some really radical stuff, and you can then blend and get all the same interactivity that a DaVinci Resolve has got. Now there's a lot more detail in the instruction manual on how to use this, and it's a creative feature, so really a lot of it's about how you feel you want things to look versus how the correct way of using it. But check the manual. Also download DaVinci Resolve Lite from our website and play with that. If you're working with a primary color corrector palette just with video files, you can get the same use, and it's a great way to practice. Okay, so we'll leave this for the moment and we'll get to the audio mixer. The Atem switches have got audio mixers built into them, and you can see obviously this has got 20 inputs. There's a lot of channels here. Now every input of the Atem switch has got a resynchronizer, and the audio has also got sample rate converters. So what that means is even though the camera doesn't have a gen lock, the audio is still working fine, and you can see it down the bottom there. Now to turn on the audio, I'll push this on button here and I'll add a bit of gain to get the audio up. You can see camera 1's on air, so you've got an on-air indicator of what's happening. Which is very nice. You don't want to, you kind of want to know that you're adjusting an audio channel that's on air. So again, you can have that indication. And you can see I've got some audio activity down here. Because I've set the audio channel on, I've also got it coming up over here. I've also got a monitoring gain setting. All the Atem switches have, well, not all of them. This model of switcher, the 2ME switches, have a separate audio monitoring output, and you can set to either have that, and if you go in fact, I'll show you where that is because it's a important feature. In the switcher settings, you can have the monitoring outputs either as the monitor audio or the program audio. I've set that to the monitor audio, so that what that means is if I push the solo buttons, I can listen to individual audio tracks on the monitoring output independently of what's on air. Now in this case, I've set the audio inputs on. I could do that to a bunch of audio inputs, and you can see there they all are. Now, that's great if you're just doing a direct mix. You've got a whole bunch of sources, you're just mixing the sources, and you want to that just create a mix like a normal audio mixer. But because it is a switcher, if you're doing sports and say car racing where you've got different cameras you're cutting to around the course, and as the cars come by, you want the audio from that camera. In this case, you don't want the audio all to be on because otherwise you're going to hear everything all around the ground, the race course at once. You want to turn on the audio follow video setting, and what will happen is as you change between sources, the audio will crossfade between the cameras. So if I go and change the program view, and I can see I'm talking at the moment, I've got audio meters showing on camera 1, and I can also see that coming out the program out. If I now switch to camera 2, you can see the audio has disappeared from the master output because I don't have that camera on air anymore. When I bring the camera back on air again, you can see it's faded back to that source. So if you're doing that kind of work, it's the audio follow video mode is what you really want. You can also do balance and a few other settings in here. So there's, again, more details in the instruction manual on how to use the audio mixer, but that's a quick overview to get your audio working and to get it up and running. So getting towards the end now, and there's a few other things that it's worth showing you. I mean, before I showed you how you can set the, well, I'll do it again. I'll show you how in the, because I don't think I did show you, but in these Atem switches, we have, we don't call it connector 1, connector 2. We do the audio, the input mapping. Now, before we can set the inputs to any label we want, now that will reflect through all the control panels. But at the same time, if you're running a control panel and you're doing 3 cameras, this switch has got 20 cameras coming in. Even the smaller switch has got 6 cameras. You might just want 1, 2, 2 or 3 cameras. You don't want everything all over the panel. You really want to be able to customize the control panels the way you like them. Not only that, because you can set multiple copies of, you can have multiple hardware panels and multiple software panels running all at the same time. You might, for example, have somebody running a software, running software when they're doing audio mixing, and they just really look at the audio mixing page. You can also plug in external audio fader panels. So you might have someone just purely set up to do audio mixing and they're running a separate copy of the Atem software. You might have someone else doing camera control. They've got their own separate monitoring. They're running literally just monitoring and they've got a separate copy running. So what you really want to be able to do is people want to be able to do different things. So in my case here, you can rearrange the buttons any way you like. So all my inputs are labeled and you can see all the labels have come up. If I change an inputs label, it'll reflect on all the control panels, even if you've got 5 or 6 of them. So in this case, I want to change some of the buttons here. So I'll go into the preferences. Now, all the control panels have their own preferences, and the preferences up the preferences menu there are for this copy only. Someone else can have a different button mapping on their control panel, but on this one you can have a different mapping based on what you want and what you're operating. So even though it's the same switcher, you've got different people with different arrangements. Now you can see the buttons mapping here. I can make all those inputs camera 1 if I like. You can also see a row of buttons down here. This is the number of control channels you've got in the CCU. I'll turn on a bunch of them and you'll see that they'll all come up in the camera control window. Now I've got 3 of the buttons all set to camera 1, which you wouldn't normally do. A lot of the times what you do is you might just set them to none. So you might just clear off all the sources you're not using and they'll clear off. So I'll do that there. I'll go OK. So you can see now some of those buttons have become disabled. So you can really just get focused. And you can see all 3 of those first buttons are now camera 1. Obviously you would never do that, but this shows you how much flexibility you've got about rearranging the control panel any way you like. Now, because I turned on in that settings window extra control channels in the camera control, you can see now I've got a whole lot more in here and I can, change between them. I've also turned off some of those. So there you go. So that looks good. Now, I might have been doing a whole lot of programming and this is how my latest switcher set up. I want to save the entire switcher state, all the settings in it. So I'll show you that quickly because I think that's a very important feature, particularly if you're coming back to the same work every day or you're doing different jobs on the same setup. You might have the switcher installed in a road crate, you're doing different kinds of work and maybe once every 2 weeks you go and do a particular type of job. You want to restore the switcher state for that specific job. Also, this saving switcher state gives you the ability to do live backups over time. So what I'll do is I'll get this switcher state, as crazy as it is, and I'll save it as a switcher state, and I'll just call it crazy because it is a bit nuts, and I'll put it on my desktop. And I can now choose what I want to save. If you look here, I can unselect it and I could save just maybe the super source only. But in this case, I'll save everything because I really want to save everything, and it's done. So you can see it's 100% complete. And that's gone and saved the frames in the media pool. It saved the switcher state. It saved all the processing. It saved pretty much everything, all the labels, the lot, even the video standard. So you can now restore that state, which I'll do. If you want to restore, I'll just go to the menu here and click restore. And I've got my switcher state here. And I'll restore everything. But actually, no, I won't. I won't restore everything. I'll just restore the super source because you can even do that. I'll click restore and now it's just restored the super source. Now, the good thing about the switcher state is it's saved as an XML file. So you can get into that. If you're a programmer or you've got someone who's got technical skill with XML, all the information in there is in XML. So you can save pieces of the switcher, you can load pieces of the switcher, you can potentially customize the XML if you wanted to and then load that. So there's a lot of power in it, in that feature. But in this case, we're just using it as an autosave, and if the autosave menu is selected here, it'll save the state of the switcher. So as you're working and as you're loading images into the media pool, it'll keep saving the switcher state all the time. And it's very powerful because it means you can essentially go back through the files in time and almost restore the switcher back to different points in time, as well as at the end getting the latest state you had as your sort of job evolves as you work. So that's pretty much the bulk of what you need to do to get started with switches. Again, check the instruction manual. There's a lot of information in the instruction manual about how to get really deep into a lot of the settings and how to use super source and a lot of the other features the switches have. There's some very powerful features in there. You know, live production's a bit addictive and it's exciting. So, you know, if you get a chance to come to one of the trade shows we visit and talk to us about what you've been up to, we'd love to hear. We'd love to hear all the feedback and ideas you've got as things we should be adding and software updates we should be doing. Please keep track of our website for the latest software because we update. Maybe follow our Twitter feed so we can alert you when we got new software available because we're adding features all the time. But you know, if you're watching this video, then you've probably bought one of our switches. So, you know, we'd like to thank you for buying the switcher, and hope you have years of fun and enjoyment. I mean, live production's addictive and it's fun and exciting, and you're part of the performance. And so there's nothing more exciting than getting out and really getting as part of that performance. So I can't wait to hear some of the stories that you guys get up to, and thank you for watching.